the person beside you.
Good evening. My name is Theodis Pace, President of the Kankakee County branch of the NACP, and I want to thank Ms. Heather Brandt and the Political Action Committee of the NACP, Mr. Steve Bertrand of the library and his staff, our panelists, Mr. Mike Rubel of the Valley radio station, Mr. Ayanna Smith, community activist, and Mr. Jeff Bonte of the Daily Journal. Both our candidates, Bill Dickinson and Mr. Kenny Wright, for the 21st Circuit judgeship. And we're going to start with a 2-minute opening statement. We're going to start with Mr. Wright.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Pace, NAACP, Kankakee Public Library, members of the panel, you and audience, and registered voters. My name is Kenneth Wright, and I'm here today to tell you why I'm best qualified to be the next judge here in the 21st Judicial Circuit. I was born and raised here. I'm a Kankakee guy. All the public schools, Kankakee High School, class of 91. Grew up here on the north side. My family, from both sides of my family, are from this area. Mother's side, father's side. Migrated from down south up through to Chicago and ended up settling in Hopkins Park area. I'm a public school graduate, like I said. I went to Kankakee High School, class of 91, Western Illinois, class of 1995, and Northern Illinois College of Law. I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to be up here and to present and tell you why I'm the best qualified candidate for this position. When learning that I was going to have this opportunity, and I'm thinking 2 minutes, a lawyer never really say anything in 2 minutes, but I'm going to try. I can tell you that I'm not a politician, but I'm not running for a political position. I'm running to be the impartial decision maker for fairness for everyone in this county. I'm not going to sit up here and read some statement. I think practicing law for 20 years, I think assume that I can read and write. I'm here because I'm qualified. I'm going to take this opportunity, even though I sit there by myself, I'm going to take this opportunity to encourage people to vote. There's a lot of people out there, there's a lot of misinformation regarding voting. There's a lot of money that's spent to suppress vote. There's a lot of people that think that they don't have a chance or that voting is insignificant. I'm here to tell you otherwise. Also encouraging people to get involved with their census, make sure you participate in the census, and make sure you take care of jury duty. Participate in jury duty. You know, there's a lot of efforts being made to, like I said, suppress vote and jury duty. And when people complain, if they don't participate in the voting process, they don't participate in the jury process, then you are part of the problem. Finally, I'm uniquely qualified for 3 reasons. I'm from this area. I'm a fresh face, not part of the Good Old Boys Network, and have fresh ideas. Also, I'm an asset to the judicial system, and I believe that at the end of this forum, I look forward to earning your vote, and I think that the difference between myself and Mr. Dickinson will be obvious. Thank you.
Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you to the NAACP for providing this candidates forum today. Thank you to Mr. Pace for reaching out last week and inviting me to be here today. I am Judge Bill Dickinson. I am currently an associate judge in the 21st Judicial Circuit, which comprises Kankakee and Iroquois County, and I am seeking election to the office of Circuit Judge. I am the only candidate in this race that has judicial experience, having been appointed to my current position in 2018 to fill an unexpired term of Judge Leshen, and then being reappointed to a new 4-year term in 2019. I have proven myself over the last 2+ years to have been a good and effective judge. And I embody the qualifications that are most necessary and most important in our judiciary: integrity, impartiality, legal ability, temperament, court management skills, good health, sensitivity in areas of bias and diversity. On an Illinois State Bar Association poll of local attorneys with knowledge of my qualifications, I scored high marks in all of those categories and attributes. In fact, 100% of the attorneys who responded to the poll about me found me to be qualified for the position of circuit judge. I earned a rating of recommended from the Illinois State Bar Association based upon those poll results. I've been working down the street in the Kankakee Courthouse for over 29 years. The first 27 I spent as an assistant state's attorney, where I gained valuable insight and trial and courtroom experience that has served me well in my 2+ years as a judge. Though I'm not originally from this area, I have lived and worked here for nearly 3 decades. I've been active in the community. I met my wife here. We choose to live and work here, We choose to raise our family here, my 2 daughters, and I have devoted my entire legal career to public service and to making our area and our communities a better place to live, to work, and to raise a family. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ruber, you have the first question, and the question is to Mr. Wright.
Thank you, and once again, good evening. What attributes do you have that make you uniquely qualified for this position?
Yes. What attributes I have make me uniquely qualified for this position? Okay, thank you, Mr. Rubel. That's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked it. The attributes that I have, I'm honest. I have no problem speaking truth to power. I have no problem being fair, representing what's right, regardless of what people think about it. I have no problem advocating for the underdog. I'm always prepared for court. I'm a professional problem solver. I believe that's important. I don't worry about doing what's popular as long as I have an opportunity to do what's right. I tell my clients, and I've been practicing for 20 years, and I don't just do criminal law. I do law and divorce, bankruptcies used to do, child support, criminal law. I always tell my clients, don't accept something in divorce cases, don't accept something that you're not willing to give. I don't believe in drawn out litigation. I don't believe in frivolous litigation. I don't believe in just people just in court fighting over nothing. I believe that a court is a place of you come there to get a problem solved and you go on with the rest of your life. That is an attribute that I am proud to have and that I believe that will bring to the bench.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson.
Well, a lot of the attributes that I have, I kind of mentioned in my opening remarks, so I'm not looking to duplicate things too much. But obviously, I believe that I have a great deal of integrity, impartiality. I'm fair to all of those who come before me. And I have a great temperament and disposition for being on the bench. So when you can apply all of those things together, I think it really makes me ideally suited for the position of circuit judge. I seek to make sure that everyone who appears before me is treated with respect and dignity. I want everyone who appears in my courtroom to feel that they were heard and treated fairly. And part of that is being patient on the bench, and part of that is having good analytical skills, knowing the law, and understanding every issue that can possibly come before you.
Ms. Smith, you have the question, and the question is to Mr. Dickinson.
How do you feel about Appellate and trial court decisions that raise concerns about rulings that were inconsistent with the law?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it's sometimes difficult with the mass. I didn't quite understand the first part of your question. If you wouldn't mind
How do
repeating
you
for me, please.
feel about Appellate and trial court decisions that raise concerns about rulings that were inconsistent with the law?
And I'm not familiar with, I must confess, I'm not familiar with Applegate. And
You mean appellate?
Appellate, sorry. Thank you, Appellate.
okay, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to belabor it now that I get that. Would you mind repeating that for me one more time, please?
Appellate, how do you feel about appellate and trial court decisions that raise concerns about rulings that were inconsistent with the law?
Well, as a judge, I am bound to do 2 things, and the first of which is to follow the statutes as written, and then secondly, I'm also bound to follow the decisions of the appellate court as it interprets the statute and also interprets the law generally. So if those things conflict, I have to follow what the appellate court has to say, even if I personally disagree with it, because that's the law and that's my sworn duty is to follow the law.
Mr. Wright.
Yes. Your question is about how do I feel about appellate court decisions that are inconsistent with the law? I believe that happens. You have a right to appeal to the Supreme Court if that happens. I want to take this opportunity to mention something. I don't know if it's a pink elephant in the room, but I hear this talk about 100% rating and things like that. Google and see what type of leaders are elected at 100%. I've been practicing law here for 20 years, and no one ever asked me about integrity of anyone running for judge. When I hear 100%, I immediately start questioning who's asking the questions and also who's answering it. And I don't know anybody that's answered a question regarding integrity, regarding candidates. I have all the integrity. And if you ask, for example, you ask people at the and Ann Arbor, who's the best football program of all time, don't be shocked when they say University of Michigan. You want to ask people about someone's integrity. Ask people that oppose them. Don't be persuaded by people that say that I'm 100%. I'm not 100% in nothing. I'm not perfect. I'm perfectly imperfect like the rest of us, and that's, I believe, is something that's important. Be afraid of, be cautious of anything that sounds so perfect and too good to be true.
Thank you. Mr. Bounty, you have the next question, and the question is to Mr. Wright.
Sir, what are your feelings on the current cash bond situation?
Yes, that's a good question, Mr. Bonnie. The cash bond situation, like I said, I've been defending people for over 20 years. It's an unfair situation. I understand that the county makes money and there's services that's provided for it, but it's not fair that people of means have a better chance of getting out of jail than people that don't have means. People that have means, when they commit crimes, they're just as much of a threat as a flight risk to someone that doesn't have means. I've had plenty of people from all over the state. I practice all over the state, drive 25,000, 30,000 miles a year, and there's plenty of people that sit in jail because they can't afford to get out. And even worse than that, there's plenty of people that plead guilty to committing crimes that they otherwise would not have pled guilty to because they're tired of sitting in jail. So I believe it needs to be revamped. I know there's a lot of money that comes from it, but it's all about if everyone is truly treated equal and we are all presumed innocent under the law, then we should have equal opportunity to get out of jail. So I believe that does need to be changed. Thank you, Mr. Bundy. That's a good question.
Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you. The situation is something that's currently undergoing great revision in our court system. 2 years ago, the legislature greatly revamped the circumstances under which people are held or who are eligible for cash bonds, and they have divided all criminal offenses into Category A and Category B offenses. Category A are generally higher class felonies, also including lower class felonies and misdemeanor charges that involve crimes of violence or crimes of threat to the public. Category B offenses, there is a statutory presumption that should not require a monetary bail. Those are lower class felonies, nonviolent felonies, nonviolent misdemeanors, and things of that. As a judge, I set bonds every day, and I follow those rules very scrupulously. If there is a person who should not be there, I have no hesitation in letting them out on a recognizance bond, and I do it all the time.
Mr. Rubel, Mr. Rubel, you have the question, and the question is to Mr. Dickinson.
Now that cannabis possession is legal in smaller amounts, what penalties should dealers face?
Well, interestingly, the possession amounts have gone down, but I do not believe that the illegal distribution or sales have changed accordingly, at least last time I checked. Obviously, if you're going to make something a petty offense, which most cannabis charges are, unless you get, I believe, north of 30 grams, which is more than an ounce, then I think those penalties should also go down. I think the legislature has recognized that marijuana was at least that's what I think they did. They recognized that marijuana was over-criminalized and it was having a disproportionate effect on communities, and so that should be adjusted accordingly for the dealing penalties as well.
Mr. Wright.
Yes, I agree 1,000%, but I believe it's also important to mention it's a disproportionate effect of minority communities and people that have lower financial means. But I agree 1,000%. The penalties are what the penalties are. Let me also take this opportunity to say hi to my wife of 10 years and my two lovely children who I know are watching. And my wife is a VA-trained eye doctor, and I want to say I love you. Thank you.
Mr. Wright, in your opening statement, you mentioned about possibly the composition of the jury pool. So, question.
Yes, sir.
Do you believe the composition of the jury adequately or fairly reflects society at large?
That's a great. I'm sorry.
Why not?
That's a great question. I'm sorry, Mr. Pace.
If not, what can we do to change this? and what are the pros or cons of using, because in order to be in the jury pool, one of them is the driving license registration as a source of jury. So what's your response?
That's a great question. One of the problems that we've had in our current judicial system is jury selection. I have done plenty of juries all over the state, and what's synonymous about when I do juries here is that we have 40 people come in, and there may be 2 or 3 people that are minorities. Most of the time I'm defending someone, they're a minority. We have a jury pool that's usually, we have one minority that gets selected or none if the state strikes them. The problem that we have is that there's a misconception about jury duty. People think that you're a sucker for falling for jury duty, but you don't understand that that is your chance to participate in the justice system. When you have a problem with something that's wrong in society and you want to hold people accountable, skipping jury duty is there's just no reason for that. People think that they say that it's only pays $16 an hour and things like $16 for the day, and that things like that. You have to do jury duty. Think about it like this: if you are wrongly charged with a crime, and you get selected and you pick a jury, who would you want on your jury? You were spending all this time and this energy trying to get out of jury duty, and yet complain about the type of people that serve as jurors. We need to offer more incentive for people to do jury duty. We need to make sure that our juries are diverse and accurately represent the population. We need to do campaign and things like that, and marketing to kind of show the power, to encourage people to get involved in jury duty.
Mr. Dickinson, you have a minute, 45 seconds.
Okay. Well, the situation, I believe, as someone who's been involved in the system here for more than 29 years, I think the system of being more inclusive in terms of the jury pools have gotten better. I know that you, Mr. Pace, have worked closely with the courthouse staff as one of the jury commissioners to try and increase minority participation in the jury pools. It is drawn from a pool of registered voters, people with driver's licenses, people with state IDs, and of course residents of the county. And the commission is working closely with the jury coordinator who works in the courthouse, who works closely with Chief Judge Kramer and the rest of the judges to try and ensure that people aren't getting off for or getting out of jury service for frivolous reasons. I do the jury indoctrination speech most Mondays when they come in, and over the time as a lawyer and again at time as a judge, I do see that minority participation is increasing. That doesn't mean that we need to stop making outreach efforts, because I think it does need to be more. I think we do need to have a more diverse body of jurors that are coming in both to the indoctrination and to the courthouse itself when it comes time for the jury selection.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, you have the question and the questions to Mr. Dickinson.
While serving on the bench, do you believe you have a role in bringing important legal or judicial issues before the public or the legislator? Why or why not? What should your role be?
Well, in terms of bringing those type of things to the legislature, our role as a judge is really somewhat limited. My job is to listen to the facts and apply the law to those facts when I hear them, whether it's in some type of trial or whether it's in some type of motion. The best thing you can do to educate the public as a judge is to do your job properly. You're no longer an advocate, you're a neutral referee, a neutral arbiter of the facts, and it's your job to do that to the best of your abilities. And by doing that, I mean, hopefully you have people in the courtroom watching what's going on. I know they do televised trials sometimes. I participated in one a while back. And you want to do your best as a judge to make sure that the public understands what's going on when you have people in front of you. I sit in mostly traffic and misdemeanor court. I do some civil stuff as well. And on any given day, I have many people coming through the courthouse. I do my best to explain things to people as they come through so that everybody in the courtroom before me sees what's going on and they can understand what to expect.
Mr. Wright?
Yes. As a judge, your obligation is to judge, is to make a decision based on the evidence before you. But I believe there's a disconnect between the judicial branch and the people at large. It's not your obligation to inform the legislative, it's the people's obligation. But I believe that because there's such a big disconnect between the judicial branch and the community, as a judge, we should be more active in the community. We should be able to be guest speakers and come talk to people in different communities, and regardless of what city you're in, and inform them as to what's going on in the system. Be prepared to answer any questions they may ask, and then be able to tell them that any concerns they have, direct them to to the legislators. They have a vote. People choose their legislators. Legislators make laws, and judges' jobs are to interpret them fairly based on the evidence. So I believe that, like I said, we can't, as judges, you don't, get involved in the legislature. There's three equal branches, co-equal branches of government. But if we're more active in the community, if we're more present in the community, show people that there's other options, I believe that, and encourage them to get involved in civics, get involved in, like I said, jury selection and voting, then your concerns will be addressed, and that people will make good laws that better serve the community, and that would come before the judges. Thank you.
Mr. Bounty, you have the question. The question is to Mr. Wright.
What can the local judicial system do better in regards to lowering recidivism?
That's a good question, Mr. Bonnie. The problem with our current system, and I've been here, like I said, for 20 years practicing law, that the system, there's a problem as a whole. It's not just in the judicial system. Like I spoke earlier, there's no presence. There's no understanding for people that there's something that it can be other than involved in crime or involved in something that they shouldn't be involved in. We need to make sure that there's programs available, drug treatment, mental health treatment. We need to make sure that people that are, don't get caught back up in crimes regarding or get locked up because of failure to pay fees. We need to create programs like SWAP where people can do community service. We need to have programs like electronic monitoring, what they have in other counties where people can have house arrest. We can't just lock everybody up just because something happens, because they can't afford to pay fees and things like that. We need to be more of a presence. We need to be more proactive in our, like I said, more presence and more proactive in our ideas.
Mr. Dickinson, you have the next question, the response, and you have a minute, 25 seconds.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the question, Mr. Bonte. And the judiciary in Kankakee and Iroquois counties have already taken steps to attempt to reduce recidivism. Our courthouse has been very active and, in fact, has been a leader in treatment courts over the many years that I've been associated there. I think in 1994 or 1995, Judge McKella began the first drug court program. Judge Erickson was state's attorney back then, and he was fully involved and got the office involved in that, with an idea of being treatment as an alternative to prison, with an idea of being reduced or dismissed charges at the end of the completion of that term as being an alternative to prison, to help people on the path to a better life. And that is still something that is a very active and very effective program within our judiciary. We were also, if not the first, among the first states in the county with a domestic violence diversion program, with education on domestic violence issues for the abuser to help combat that issue of recidivism. There is also a veterans treatment court that was founded several years ago, and Judge Kramer was at the forefront of that. Again, a designation with an idea of treatment as opposed to just simply punishment. So I think you have seen a shift over the last several years from something that has been more punitive to something with a goal of being restorative.
Mr. Dickinson, in the area of hate crimes, what are some of the issues in balancing free speech rights against the need to control offensive activity?
Well, it does come at an intersection because everyone, as you noted, people have free speech rights. Where the hate crimes come in is, generally speaking, when there's another crime associated and the hateful speech is used to basically show that the underlying motivation for the crime was based on hate. people are entitled under our Constitution to say unpopular things if that's what they choose to do. But when you combine it with crimes, then that's when you get into the hate crime area, and that's what the statutes are designed to enforce. Are people who commit crimes when the motivation is based upon national origin, race, gender, sexual orientation, any of those types of things, and that's where the free speech is used to inform the fact that that crime itself is based upon hate as opposed to just, I guess, being a crime.
Mr. Wright,
Could you please repeat the question, Mr. Pace?
in the area of hate crimes, what are some of the issues in balancing free speech rights against the need to control offensive activities?
Yes, that's a good question. I agree with Mr. Dickinson that the reason of the crime, if it's based on hate, if you're a member of a protected class, that should be punished more severely than just the crime itself. It's a very difficult balance because we do have right to free speech. We have to make sure that we don't punish people whether or not we agree with what they say or disagree. People have a right to say what they want to say, but it's also important that we don't use our speech to excite others, to create create harm to other people, to motivate like I said, to motivate other people to commit crimes. So it is a delicate balance, and it's something that I know that's very challenging. But it's definitely needed, and we definitely have to make sure that people aren't using their rights to infringe on someone else's rights.
Thank you. Mr. Rubel, you have the question, and the question is to Mr. Wright.
What injustices have you personally witnessed inside or outside the courtroom, and what was your response to those events?
Yes, sir. I try to answer that within a minute. I have been practicing for, like I said, for 20 years. I witness injustice all the time. I witness injustice in the courthouse where I'm representing pro bono veterans, and I'm representing single dads, trying to be fathers in their lives. I'm representing people pro bono that otherwise cannot afford to bond themselves out, or family doesn't have money for bond. I'm witnessing people that get longer sentences, seems to me, when they are, don't come from, I guess, one of the good old boy network. They're not privileged. They don't have a big name. Outside the courthouse, it's pretty much the same thing. There's a lot of systemic problems. I've witnessed injustices in the courtrooms where judges act as dictators. I've seen it, and I've complained about it. I've actually written letters to the judiciary, the inquiry board regarding judicial behavior, and had an investigator contact me stating that they do get letters all the time, but very rarely do they get someone willing to put their name behind it. That's the type of person I am. I put my name behind it. If it's wrong, it's wrong.
Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you. Could I have the question again, please, Mr. Rubel?
What injustices have you personally witnessed inside or outside the courtroom, and what was your response to those events?
Well, certainly in my prior career as a prosecutor, you would see injustice done to people when they became victims of crime, innocent victims of crimes. There's an injustice done to those people, and I did my best as a prosecutor to fight for justice on behalf of the state and on behalf of the victims of those crimes. As a judge, I can't say that I've seen a lot of what I believe to be injustice in the courtroom, but it is part of my job to make sure that everybody who is similarly situated is treated fairly and equally. And if I see, for example, that the state is offering somebody a different deal than someone else, I have the power, and I have in fact rejected those deals when I don't feel that people are being treated fairly. So my goal in working in the system is to make sure that everyone treats fair before me, regardless of their background, regardless of who they are, is treated fairly and equally. And when I need to step forward as a judge to make sure that that is done, I have and I will continue to do that.
Thank you.
I can answer it again if you want, because I have additional information if you want to, if you got some time.
Question to you, Mr. Wright.
Yes, sir.
From the audience. Kankakee County was originator of the video appearance from the jail. What suggestions do you have to improve the VA system?
I don't have any suggestions regarding the VA system. It seems to work very well. People show up, especially now during COVID. I don't have any problem with people appearing on VA. It's a situation where people have the right to show up if they want to court. If it has to be brought over if there's something of substance that's happening. Otherwise, the VA system works fine. I'll be reluctant to say that as it relates to just the last question. I personally have had cases involving myself and Mr. Dickinson when he was practicing on as the state's attorney's office. I know personally and had to write letters to his boss regarding things that I thought that were less than appropriate, and this is in a murder case. So people say what they would do, but I know what people have done.
Mr. Dickinson.
Well, I'm going to respond to your question, and your question only. The VA system was a great idea when it came through here. It certainly helped with security, and it helped with a lot of things. I mean, there are some issues with it, chiefly being the sound, sitting as a judge, because sometimes it's spotty and inconsistent. And if it's spotty and inconsistent, for me to be able to hear what's going on and to be able to hear the person who's supposed to be speaking to us from the jail, then it's difficult for the audience to hear that as well. As technology improves, I expect those problems to improve as well, and I would hope that at some point it could possibly even be more, especially in light of the pandemic and nobody really knowing what the health situation is going to be like over the next several months, if not years. It would certainly be nice to be able to find a way to have that be more accessible to the public, whether it's through a YouTube stream or some type of in-house court streaming or something of that nature.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, you have the question, and the question is to Mr. Dickinson.
What do you believe to be the root cause for high numbers of juvenile offenders? What changes can the court system make to reduce these numbers?
Well, that's a good question, and that's another one that's really difficult to answer in a minute. The causes of crime, whether it's in adult or juveniles, are enormously complex. It can be parenting issues, it can be community issues, it can be economic and poverty issues, and there's not a great rubber band or fix-all to come to all of those things. I think education from an early age, parental involvement from an early age, resources to children in crisis, whether it's some type of criminal crisis or whether it's some type of parenting crisis, DCFS involvement, community involvement. Those are the type of things, when you have an active and engaged community, when you have a community that looks out for each other, especially our children, those are the type of things that really lend themselves to being a much stronger community, and in turn, that keeps our children away from being at risk.
Mr. Wright.
First of all, the first thing you can do is elect me to be the judge for the 21st Circuit. I believe that children need to see something more than what they see. It's very obvious that here in the history of our county, we've never had a person from my neighborhood, someone of my background, elected judge. We can't just continue to have people, the same, like I said, good old boys, elected to the bench. We can't just continue to only see minorities and people from disadvantaged circumstances as defendants. We need to show them that there's role models and that there's something they strive to be other than what they see in their community. We also need to make sure we invest in social services. We need to make sure we invest in education. We need to make sure that we give people employment opportunities. So there's a lot of things that we can do, but I believe that showing them, running for a position like I'm running for, in my 47 years, I'm not even familiar with someone from my community even been in this position before. Diversity is like, it's the spice of life. Show people that there's more, that they can do more, and that just because, they're not where they come from. I believe that'll help with recidivism in the juvenile system.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Dickinson, he's over. You have 25 seconds to rebuttal or to add.
I think I'm fine,
Okay.
thank you.
Mr. Bounty, you have the next question, and the question is to Mr. Wright.
Do you feel the war on drugs has been effective or ineffective?
Well, that's an interesting question, Mr. Bonnie. There's always been going to be drug problems. In my 20 years, it seemed to have changed. Initially, there were more of the problems were with controlled substances as far as, cocaine and heroin and things like that. But now it seems like a lot more of the cases are starting to be, crystal meth and opioids and things like that. There's a lot of need for mental health treatment, and there's a lot of, before you can fix the problem with the war on drugs, we have to take the opportunity to understand who the people are and why they're involved in drugs and why is that a part of their life. The war on drugs, if you're talking about from a user perspective, that's when the social services come in. That's when understanding, mental health comes in. That's where you identify people that are self-medicating, and you take the steps to, to give them those services.
Mr. Dickinson.
Well, the war on drugs, I think they first started calling that back in the 1980s when President Reagan was in office, and drugs are still here. So there's a certain amount of ineffectiveness, obviously, that's gone on in the war on drugs. I think any number of studies have shown that the impact of the so-called war on drugs was very inequitable, especially how it affected communities of color. Just like with almost anything else, there's an economic component to drug dealing. There's supply and demand. So if the war would be more focused on the demand, then that would eliminate the need for a supply. So again, things like the drug court, treatment courts, getting people involved in drug treatment early on, it's a much cheaper alternative to prison. It cuts down recidivism, and it has a much greater long-term better effect on both our communities and the people involved with the drugs.
Mr. Rubel, you have a question to Mr. Dickinson.
Do you believe that all citizens have adequate access to legal help as well as the legal system? And if not, what can be done to provide wider and better access?
Well, thank you for the question. And no, not all people do have equal access to the legal system. But there are initiatives in place that are trying to make things much better. The Supreme Court has recently undertaken an initiative to make standardized forms for what we call self-represented litigants, so people can represent themselves more easily on the courthouse, particularly in simpler matters. Now, obviously, very complex matters oftentimes require a lawyer, but there are a number of things that people from the community can do themselves. We have a service corps with a desk in the courthouse that helps direct people to those forms so that they can better represent themselves and have better access to the legal community. It would be nice if there was better funding for our local legal aid societies like Prairie State and places like that, so that those who can't afford an attorney for civil matters would have a better way to go and better access.
Mr. Rubel, you have the next question, and the question is to Mr. Wright.
I'm sorry, do I have an opportunity to answer that question, Mr. Pace?
You do. Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rubel, could you please repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Certainly. Do you believe that all citizens have adequate access to legal help as well as the legal system? And if not, what can be done to provide wider and better access?
Okay. I absolutely do not believe that people have equal access to the legal system. There are a lot of people that cannot afford to get an attorney, and as you know, that people are struggling, so they can't afford to get an attorney. And a lot of times they have to use a public defender who's also overworked. What I've done in my 20 years, I've always kept multiple pro bono cases. Attorneys like myself should have an obligation to serve our community. We have an obligation to serve people in the legal profession and to show, to give them opportunity access to the courts. One of the ideas that I had that I've seen in other places, we should have pro bono court. Everybody that comes through the legal system doesn't need an attorney. We should have court for people, that have simple cases. We should have, I've also seen, people, attorneys that represent people and encourage litigation and run up fees and things like that. We don't do that. I don't believe in that. I believe it's unethical, and I believe that, you know, with those changes, I think we'd have a better legal system. It only works
Thank you.
if it works for us all.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, you have the question. The question's to Mr. Wright.
How would you deal with a pro se party appearing in your court?
Well, what I would do is that I would first tell them that, and it depends if it's a criminal case or civil case, that you know, that they, you know, inform that they may if they're pro se and it's a criminal case, and I, you know, advise them if they can afford a public defender. If they cannot afford if they didn't qualify for a public defender, I'd encourage them to get a lawyer, and then warn them that, you know, they would not receive any favorable treatment in the law, procedural or substantively, because they are pro se. The system is a system. I would encourage them to get a lawyer if they can. That's what I would do. But I would also be very understanding and let them work themselves through, you know, answering their questions and getting their point across. But you know, for the fairness of the system, you have to be consistent. Whether or not someone is pro se and they exercise their right to represent themselves, or whether or not they're represented by counsel, you have to be consistent. Procedural due process is very important. It's equally as important as substantive due process. So fairness in the law, fairness in the way the law is applied.
Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Smith, for the question. I know how to deal with pro se defendants because I deal with pro se defendants dozens of times every day, probably hundreds of times a month, because in traffic court, you have a lot of people with simple speeding tickets and simple matters that they choose to come in and handle themselves. At the beginning of my court call each and every day, I give a little bit of an introductory speech about what to expect during the course of the call. I go over thoroughly with everyone what their rights are as they are facing their ticket, whether it's a right to plead guilty or not guilty, their right to a lawyer, their right to represent themselves if that's what they choose to do, and if they can't afford one in a case they're eligible for it, the right to a public defender. When people come before me, and frankly, a lot of people on speeding tickets do just come up and plead guilty or disregarding a stop sign ticket. I see people do it on misdemeanors all the time, and I make sure that I fully go over with and understand their rights, because the linchpin of making someone knowledgeable about what they're doing is making sure that they are knowingly and voluntarily doing whatever action as they choose to undertake in the courtroom. And so by doing my best to educate them through the process as it comes by, repeating myself many times throughout the day, I like to try and embody that.
Mr. Bowney, you have the question, and the question's to Mr. Dickinson.
Do you feel the state government has aided or hindered the judicial system?
Well, that's an interesting question. There are times it does both. There are times they sometimes pass laws or legislation that are odds with, say, Supreme Court rules, and when they do that, they create a little bit of a constitutional mess about what trumps what. Generally, the Supreme Court rules trump the legislature when you're talking about matters of the court. Certainly more money for more resources would be helpful, but I also understand that there is limited money to go around in the state right now. The judiciary, generally speaking, stands independent from the legislature. That's the way that we are designed, with the executive branch standing independently from all of us. Now, ideally, they all work together, but sometimes there's conflict, and sometimes they help us, and sometimes they don't.
Mr. Wright?
Yes, Mr. Barnett, could you please repeat the question, please?
Do you feel that state government aids or hinders the judicial system?
Okay. I believe a little bit of both. I believe one of the problems with the judicial system as it relates to state government is in the issues of like campaign financing and things like that. Somehow our judicial system has become very partisan. The judicial system should be independent. People should expect fairness and when they come to court, regardless of what party they belong to, where they come from, who they know, who endorses them, and things like that. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars spent, even in our Supreme Court race, millions of dollars spent for partisan politics. We need to take the money out of politics. We need to take the money out of judicial races. All judges should run as independent, because that's your obligation, is to represent people independently and impartially when they come in the courtroom. I don't have any corporate money. I don't have any sponsors. I don't have any endorsements. Everything I did, I pay for myself. I'm beholden to nobody. All of my opponents' sign says paid for by Republican Central Committee. I didn't ask anybody for endorsements because I'm here for the people. I didn't come here to get endorsements. I came here to get votes.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright, would you favor or oppose a system in which all sentences decisions were routinely reported in the local newspaper, indexed by the name of the judge?
Yes. There's a saying that democracy dies in the darkness. And I believe that what happens is that, you know, people need to know. If you're strong enough and you're convinced that a decision that you make is right, then you should be held accountable for it. You should be proud enough to say it in public. You shouldn't be able to just, just have the decision made and just, just disappear. People act differently when they know that that there's transparency, and I believe that, and especially in law, if the evidence supports a finding of guilty, regardless of what community you're in, you should go to jail, and judges should be proud to do that. That's doing your job. Equally, if the evidence doesn't support it, regardless of what community you come from, regardless of what political party you belong to, they should be found not guilty, and judges should be proud to do that.
Mr. Dickinson.
And if I understand your question correctly, Mr. Pace, was do I favor or oppose a system where all sentences and dispositions are reported by the paper, including the name of the judge? Is that
correct? The
gist of it? Well, I would favor something like that. In any system of government, more transparency is never a bad thing. And that would certainly be transparent. People would have an idea of who sentenced whom to what. And so, yeah, short answer is yes.
Thank you. Mr. Rubel, you have the questions to Mr. Dickinson.
There continues to be a rash of shootings locally. What role does a judge have in dealing with this?
Well, not a huge role, because the judge gets involved on the back end after somebody has already been charged, or sometimes when things are going on, if we're asked to review a search warrant in a case, which certainly I do routinely. The role of the judge comes into play when somebody is charged and brought before you. And the role of the judge at that point is to treat everybody fairly, regardless of their circumstances. So in terms of legislation, in terms of passing rules or things like that, the judge really does not have a lot of the role. Your judge is to be a neutral judge of the facts, to be a neutral referee of what's going on.
Mr. Wright?
Yes, I agree with Mr. Dickinson on that point, but I want to also add that I grew up here. I see these kids in the street. Some of the stuff that's happening these days didn't happen when I was growing up here in the 80s. It didn't happen. The reason that I'm not part of that system is because people, my teachers, my coaches, my professors, Professor Briscoe at Western Illinois University, Professor Walton, my law school professors, members of the community, they took an interest in my life. My family, we need to show people in our community that they can be more. They need to show them that, that they have something to add to society other than doing things that are causing harm to other people. We need to be a better example. We need to be inclusive. We need to be diverse. I believe that if you show people that there is a place for them in all aspects of life, then they will do better. And I believe that that's just not present right now. We have the same system that's been going on. Sorry, thank you.
Ms. Smith, you have the next question. The question is to Mr. Wright.
Do you believe the current system for disciplining lawyers and judges is effective? Why or why not?
That's a good question. I am a lawyer, so I definitely don't want to put myself in a situation where I'll be disciplined. But I believe that it's not. Everything is advisory. When you're a lawyer and a judge, you are trusted with great responsibility. And a lot of times, especially in criminal law cases, you have someone's life and liberty in your hands. And when you do things to mess that up and not behave properly, there should be consequences. You should not be the slap on the wrist. You're held to a higher standard. When you take all those classes and you get those degrees and people entrust you like a fiduciary, you have to do better. there should be serious consequences. The same thing with judges. We have a lot of people that, that are judges that, they do whatever they want to. There should be a system of removing judges easier when they do something to break the law, and there should be some accountability. We have tons and tons of cases here in Kankakee County that there's appeals. And, people, if you don't like the ruling, you just appeal it. And stuff gets overturned on appeal and, on the Appellate Court, Supreme Court, and there's no consequences. You should be ashamed as a judge that your case is appealed, and the people should know that, and we should have an opportunity to discipline people when that happens.
Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. There are currently two avenues, one for lawyers and one for judges, of challenging or bringing about either a attorney or judicial discipline. There's the ARDC, or the Attorney Registration Disciplinary Committee, and if somebody, whether it's another lawyer or whether it's someone who's been represented by somebody, feels that they've been wronged or treated poorly, they can file a complaint with the ARDC. It consists of lawyers, it consists of citizens, and then they get involved, decide whether or not to file a complaint, and then the lawyer, if someone is accused of something, is afforded due process rights, a right to a hearing, a right to representation, all those types of things. They've got a similar circumstance set up for the Judicial Inquiry Board, where people can make complaints against judges, and it's evaluated, though slightly different, in much the same way. So there are mechanisms in place to do that. You don't see over the course of the years necessarily a ton of lawyers or a ton of judges being disciplined, but when it does work, it does work. I think I saw in the Tribune within the last couple of weeks there was a judge removed from Cook County due to some misconduct that he did, and that case took far too long, but ultimately he was removed.
Mr. Bounty, you have the question. The question is to Mr. Dickinson.
What do you think about the growing prison population, and what response should society as well as the state have to prison overcrowding?
Well, I think that question is rooted in many things. I really do firmly believe that there has to be a greater emphasis on rehabilitative programs. Because I think study after study after study has shown again that simply incarcerating people for the sake of incarcerating people doesn't do anything to help the communities in the long term. Now, certainly if someone is a danger to society, a violent person who commits a horrible crime, yeah, that's somebody who does need to be locked up for a long time. But certain drug offenses, property offenders, things of that nature, what they need is education, what they need is treatment, and what they need are alternatives to prison. Because if you're just sending someone to prison without a hope of changing anything, you're just warehousing them, and what do you think's going to happen when they get out? They're going to go back into that lifestyle and wind back up in the same place. So I think the money, if you're talking about a limited financial pie, I think a larger portion of that pie really needs to go into rehabilitative, educational programs, drug treatment programs, things like that.
Mr. Wright?
Yes, Mr. Pace, could you please answer the question again? I'm sorry, Mr. Bounty.
What do you think about the growing prison population? What response should society have to prison overcrowding?
Okay, that's a good question. It's terrible. Unfortunately, that's a multifaceted problem. There's issues with for-profit prisons. We have people that, like I said, they're in the business of putting people in prison, and then you have those same companies making campaign contributions for people running for state's attorneys, judges, and other elected officials. That shouldn't happen. There does need to be programming involved, but like I said, there's also societal problems also that put people in a situation where they end up in prison. It's hard for a person to go to prison and not receive any kind of services, and then come out and expect to be a model citizen. We can't imprison everyone. We have to give them hope. We have to give them an opportunity. We have to give them services. We have to give them skills. We also have to give them faith. I noticed that even here in our county system, there's not a lot of church programs available for people that are here in our jails. People need to be able to transition to something better than what they came from before they came to prison. They need to have those options.
Here's a question that can segue into the last question. What is your vision, Mr. Wright, for the future of our judicial system? What changes would you advocate for and why?
Sir. My vision, like I said earlier, I believe our judicial system needs to be updated. It should actively reflect the population which it serves, both here in Iroquois County. We have a very diverse group. It needs new ideas, it needs new faces, it needs new inspirations, it needs modernizing. We need, like I said, more judicial involvement in the community and presence and things like that. We need new programming. We need to make sure that there are services, that people have access to legal services and training and things like that. Like I said, we need to also make sure that there's programs for community service and that there's other things that, other ways that people can pay back their fines, cleaning up, meaningful community service, cleaning up the neighborhoods, volunteering for programs, things like that to offset some of these large fines and things like that. That's important.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson?
Well, I certainly would agree with Mr. Wright in that the system needs some modernization. Some of the things that he addressed, such as the fines, that's been addressed by the legislature, and now there are ways of paying down your fines by opting to do community service instead of paying the fines, which is a good idea, because I would also agree with Mr. Wright that I'm not interested in having debtors' prisons or having people have their license placed indefinitely on hold because they've been unable to pay off their traffic tickets. The system needs modernization. The system needs more technology. I think that makes it more open and accessible to everyone. I mean, who doesn't have a cell phone these days? And if you can access information that you need to get you access to the court system, then that makes everything better. There is more information out there available for everyone, but the question is, how do we use that to harness people, to get them more invested into our criminal justice system, into our legal system, into our civil system, so it can be open and accessible to everybody, regardless of means.
Thank you. Mr. Ruber, you have a question, and the question is to Mr. Dickinson.
Okay, bear with me on this one a little bit. While serving on the bench, do you believe you have a role in bringing important legal issues before the public or the legislature? Why or why not? And what should your role be?
Well, certainly part of the role of a judge is to educate the public where possible. And so if there are speaking engagements and things like that, you certainly do want to go out and encourage that when possible. The Supreme Court canons of judicial ethics even describe going out and be able to do that, getting out in the community, even if it's something simple like reading to school children, which I've done several times over my time on the bench. There are also roles in there to appear in front of the legislature. We're fortunate to have in our system, our chief judge, Mike Kramer, is actually the chief of the Council of Chief Judges. So with that, he carries great sway and he carries a great ability. Our first and primary job is to hear cases and hear cases fairly and to manage our court calls. But a corollary to that is make sure the public understands what's going on and make sure the public understands why things are going. So certainly getting out, getting in the community, testifying if need be in front of the legislature, all those things are valuable for forwarding the goals and ambitions of the court system.
Mr. Wright?
Yes, sir. Could you please repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Well, serving on the bench, do you believe you have a role in bringing important legal issues before the public or the legislature? Why or why not? What should your role be?
Yes, sir. The legislative, not so much. I believe that's the people's obligation to bring their concerns to the legislator. To the public, I believe that there is an obligation for the judges. And then we need to make sure that we are taking steps to deter people from being involved in the legal system. And sometimes it's attending community programs and speaking and telling them, how the new cannabis laws affect their community, the changes in the laws, giving them advice as to, new laws that are coming, how to better avoid certain situations. We have an obligation. When I see an opportunity and I see someone, even in court, regardless of where they come from, and I see someone in need of legal help, I represent them pro bono if they need it. I have seen people that have held signs in front of the courthouse saying how disadvantaged, how the court system doesn't work for them, are saying something, and I've represented them pro bono. When I see there's a need, I don't just speak. I step up, I file my appearance, and I represent them. I give them the
Thank you,
legal
Mr.
service
Wright.
that they need. Sorry.
Ms.
Thank
Smith, you have the next question. Any questions to Mr. Wright?
What do you perceive as the greatest obstacle to justice, if any?
Well, the greatest obstacle to justice currently, in my opinion, is cronyism. Currently, there's no diversity, once again, in our judicial system. Historically, Kankakee only elects state's attorneys, ex-state's attorneys to be judges. Justice is more than just prosecution. It's defense of human people's rights, defense of the constitutional rights, regardless of what you feel about them. Our freedom of speech, our right to organize, your right to bear arms, your right to free exercise of religion, your freedoms against unreasonable search and seizures. There's too much cronyism. You have people that are running unopposed, like what's historically happened in this county. You have people that are endorsed by all law enforcement, the state's attorneys, the coroners. It's too much. It's too much cronyism. There's no diversity. Personally, as a defense attorney, I'd be concerned if I'm representing a person that goes before the bench and they have the prosecutor, the friends with the police, and everybody work together in the state's attorney's office.
Thank you,
How's
Mr.
that
Wright.
justice?
Mr. Dickinson.
The greatest obstacle to justice is access to it. I think we need to really focus our efforts on making our court system open and accessible to anyone who needs access to our court system, whether that's more funding for our Prairie State Legal Services, places like that, more funding for our public defender, for indigent defendants in criminal cases, more access to forms and technology so people can represent themselves more effectively without having to go into debt or without having to pay for an expensive lawyer if they otherwise can't afford one in a civil matter. There is a great wealth of experience among the judiciary in Kankakee and Iroquois counties. Just to name a few, Judge Cunnington, Judge Kramer, Judge Sable, Judge Albrecht. I think Judge Cunnington was an assistant state's attorney for about a year, 30 years ago. The rest of those judges all came from either private practice or public defender's offices. Lindsey Parkers, sorry.
You have 15 seconds.
Okay. Lindsey Parkers, who is running unopposed, is coming from the state representative. She was a public defender. So there is a great deal of knowledge and a great spectrum of people from the legal community who serve as our judges. When I was selected in 2018, I was the first associate judge, or the first judge taken out of the state's attorney's office in 18 years. So it's not like we're being overrun by prosecutors. We have fair and impartial judges throughout our system.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Mr. Bounty, you have the question and the questions to Mr. Dickinson.
In this day and age, what advice would you give to a person thinking about going and getting a law degree?
Well, I guess that's another issue probably with the access, is it's gotten incredibly expensive. The costs of going to law school are astronomical. When I got out, I paid for my schooling with loans and with money that I earned in jobs. It was a lot, but it was affordable, and I wasn't in debt for the rest of my life. People who get out of law school now, I think tuition, even at public schools, often in state schools, start $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 sometimes. For a private school, you're looking $70,000, $80,000 probably just for tuition. And over the course of 3 years, plus your living expenses, is prohibitively expensive. So if someone's considering it, be aware of the financial circumstances. But certainly, at least for me, it's been a very, very rewarding career serving the public, and I'm very grateful that I've had the opportunity to do so.
Mr. Wright?
Yes, that's a good question. I would encourage anyone, especially people that have a history of not being able to stand up for themselves, people that have do not come from economic means, people that are don't see a lot of professionals routinely, I would encourage them to go to law school. It's very rewarding. Not only would I encourage them, I myself went to school to be a doctor, and then I ran to a zoology lab, and I realized that this is not for me. I have personally have my goddaughter who went to college to become a doctor, and I encouraged her to become a lawyer. I told her I'd give her $500 that if she just take the LSAT, just take it. She doesn't have to go to law school. That was 4 years ago. I'm proud to say right now she is taking her bar exam, and I'm very proud of that. I would encourage everyone. I think it's an obligation that we encourage people to strive for better and to do better.
Thank you. We'd like to thank our panel, Ms. Smith, community activist, Mr. Mike Ruber from the Valley, and Mr. Jeff Bonney of the Daily Journal, our timer, Secretary of the NACP, Ms. Paulette Crink. We definitely like to thank our candidates for taking time out to participate and for the voters to hear their platform and the issues that, if elected, how they would deal with as a judgeship. We're in the closing statement, and we have a 2-minute closing statement. Mr. Dickinson, you starting, followed by Mr. Wright.
Thank you again, Mr. Pace and the Kankakee NAACP. Thank you to all the panelists and everybody who's here with us present today and watching, I guess at home or wherever you may be streaming this. As I said at the outset, I am the only candidate in this race who has judicial experience. I'm the only candidate in this race who received a rating of recommended by the Illinois State Bar Association poll. I have proven that I can do this job. I have proven that I am a good and effective judge. I have received endorsements from retired judges. I've received endorsements from attorneys. I've received endorsement from our countywide officials, not because of who I am or because I'm part of some old boy network, but because I work hard, and because I worked hard for this community, because I've spent 29 years working in that courthouse in public service as an assistant state's attorney and then a judge. And I'm very proud of that public service. I have gotten those endorsements because I have earned them through my conduct on and off the bench. I have raised my family here. I have been active in the community, whether it's from something as simple as coaching soccer to being involved with speaking to citizens police academies when I was an attorney, to educate senior citizens and citizens of Kankakee. I have laid down deep roots. As I stated, I was not from here, but I certainly am now. I've spent 29 years growing into this community, and this community has grown into me. And I believe that my qualifications, the time that I have spent working as a judge, are second to none. And I believe that everything that we've learned today, everything that you've heard about my qualifications, everything that you've heard about my experience and my time working on behalf of the citizens of this county and Iroquois County have clearly demonstrated that I am the best and most qualified candidate to become the next circuit judge in the 21st Judicial Circuit. And I thank you for all of your time.
Thank you. Mr. Wright?
I want to first thank everybody for coming and everybody from watching, to our viewers and voters online. Thank you, NAACP, and thank you for Kankakee Public Library. I don't have endorsements. I've never sought an endorsement. I'm not a part of a system. I'm an attorney. I'm a person that's fair, and I believe in fairness for everyone. Anyone can get an endorsement. I have not been asked, except for the first time last week, about my platform. Mr. Dickinson serves as a judge, but he's a judge appointed by the judges. He's not elected by the people. My job here is to earn the vote of the people. This is your opportunity to voice your concerns about and select a judge that you want to represent the 21st Judicial Circuit. There's a lot of made about these 100% ratings. I was never asked to participate in the rating. I was never asked. Like I said, I've been practicing 20 years. I've never asked about my opinion regarding Mr. Dickinson or his service. All these people that endorse are a part of the Good Old Boy Network. There's two judges here, two female judges that currently serve and that have been elected. I have heard things like, I'm wasting my time running for this position. Don't go to Iroquois County. People in Iroquois County are not ready for a diverse judge. There could be career suicide to run for judge. And talk like that has led people to not run for these positions. These positions have been run unopposed. There are 3 positions open. Mine is the only one that's contested. I'm not sitting back and asking and falling in line and just letting people walk into judicial positions. The judges made their choice. I'm asking for the people to make your choice. This is not just about me. It's about the community. It's about our public schools. It's about our kids. It's about fairness. It's about opportunity. It's very important.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. We'd like to thank our candidates for participating tonight. Again, our panel, Mr. Bertrand and the staff of the Kankakee Public Library.